Welcome to the 79th episode of the GameFor Podcast. In this episode, we'll talk about whether crowdfunding is still good for tabletop games. I'm Adam.
I'm Matt.
And this is the GameFor Podcast. GameFor is a platform to help connect tabletop gamers and to help you get more out of your tabletop gaming. Matt and I are part of a software development and design company called MilkCan. And because most of the folks at MilkCan love tabletop games, we developed the GameFor app and launched it in early 2018. We launched this companion podcast in June 2019 to help tabletop gamers get more enjoyment out of their hobby. Due to the COVID-19 global pandemic, we hibernated the GameFor app in July of 2020 and plan to bring back a retooled version of the app for Android, iOS, and web when gaming in person is safer. Until then, we'll keep bringing you this podcast to help you get more out of your tabletop gaming. I might sound a little different because I'm in the basement. We're recording from home today because it's just scheduling meetings and stuff like that. It didn't work out the way we wanted to, and then this morning it's been really warm here, warmer than usual for June in Wisconsin.
Yeah, now they're talking about tornadoes and stuff, so we might end up in Kansas or something by the end of the day.
Well, yeah, gosh, I hope not, because I have to catch a bus to get back or something like that. But yeah, so I was going to record my normal spot where I do the every other Sunday show upstairs on YouTube, and it was just so warm. And we have AC, but we hadn't turned it on yet, and I was like, you know what? It's much cooler in the basement. So I've got recording stuff down there. So yeah, that's why that's going on.
Yeah, my poor dog. He was having his grooming appointment get canceled a few weeks ago, and we couldn't get him in. He's finally in like 2 weeks from now. But yeah, he's like, he's just shaggy, and I feel so bad because when he goes outside, he's just like instantly panting. So.
Oh yeah. My mom just got her dog groomed, so she's a little bit cooler, I think. So that's good. So besides dog grooming,
it's the dog grooming podcast.
I mean, we could pivot, I guess, but I don't know that that's necessarily what our audience is looking for. But what have you been doing? What kind of things have you been going on?
So I was like going through, and I'm like, I don't think I did any tabletop stuff really. Talked a little bit about different stuff, but didn't actually get to it. In fact, even canceled some plans because I ended up going with my brother and youngest son to Denver to watch game 2 of the Western Conference Finals for NHL. So
for hockey,
yes, for hockey. So that was, I mean, we had a fantastic time, but yeah, that and work and everything else really cut into the extracurriculars. So.
The gaming extracurriculars.
Right.
You mostly had a good time, it sounds like, for the Denver.
Oh yeah. Other than the score, we had an awesome time. We got to see Wayne Gretzky and be on the TNT pre-show, and my son got a game puck and also like an official like team puck from the trainers and one of the players.
That's pretty cool.
Stuff. Yeah.
Wow. So yeah.
Yeah,
and your trip back was a bit weird.
Yeah, flight got canceled just as I was getting ready in the morning to head to the airport. So had to recancel and change flights and
reschedule.
Such, yeah, recancel. That doesn't make sense. So ended up coming in like I think like 8 hours later than what we were supposed to, which kind of killed off our Sunday plans and that stuff. But yeah, one of our close friends, they just went on their 20th wedding anniversary trip. Found out they were flying the same airline that we were, and theirs got canceled on the way out. But after they were already in Chicago, so they got stuck in Chicago for 2 days on the way to their trip. So it actually killed off like 2 days of their trip to Mexico or wherever they were going. So
do we want to say which airline is the one we shouldn't be flying?
I suppose. I mean, it was Allegiant, but it's from talking to Milkcan Jason, who was a pilot. Commercial pilot. Yeah, it sounds like from people, his friends and stuff that are still in the industry, that you're really not safe with many of them. The thing that makes Allegiant a little bit tougher is that they only fly certain days of the week, stuff like that. So
Sure, yeah,
it's
yeah.
hard to get rescheduled. Whereas like if Delta cancels, a lot of times you've got later flights you can take and stuff like that. But yeah, it sounds
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's going to get much worse before it gets better.
Yeah, yeah. So that's fun, I'm
Yeah,
really looking for
I mean,
I do have technically a flight in late August to go to Nova, and it's through Delta, but it's to DC, and you'd think that they wouldn't need to cancel that kind of stuff, but I'm a bit concerned, I'm not going to lie. So, yeah.
yeah, yeah, there's just shortage of pilots, and then if someone gets sick and all that stuff, yeah, they're just kind of moving stuff around. So
Yeah. So a fun hobby time then is what you're saying.
yeah, tons of fun hobby time. But yeah,
Probably probably should have brought some stuff to work on in the airport.
oh, that would have been nice.
I mean, they
But
won't let you have like an X-Acto blade or whatever and all that kind
right,
of stuff. I'm sure. Yeah, that's not going to work
and
out
it'd
now
have
that
to
you
go,
think of it.
carry on because you don't want to
Yeah.
check that baggage. That wouldn't make it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
yeah, so lots of fun, awesome hobby time for everybody. No, but how about you? I think you've actually done stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's see here. I finished my Gloomspite Gits that I've been painting on Twitch for seems like a couple of months now. And I actually got to play them on Sunday in Warcry against my friend Sam Lenz,
Hmm.
friend of the show. Well, friend of my YouTube channel, definitely. He's been on there a bunch of times and stuff like that. And if you know miniature painting, you probably have heard his name. And so yeah, he and I played on Sunday. First game, we were like we were both sure I had lost, and then somehow I pulled out a draw at the
Nice.
very last minute. I had a goblin riding a wolf who shot through an arrow through a doorway and took out a guy. So then, therefore, it was a draw.
Nice.
And then the second game, I just got stomped. So that was fine too. But we had a good time. It was fun. I actually made a YouTube short with some footage from it, and it went up live this morning. Now that I come to think of it. So yeah, I did that. I made a video about the Horus Heresy box, the big, huge army
Oh
box
yeah.
from Games Workshop. Horus Heresy, for those of you who don't know, is so there's Warhammer 40,000, and 40,000 relates to like the year.
Yep.
It's like we would be in we
2K.
would be in Warhammer 2000 is what we would be, but so it's 38,000
Yeah.
years from now. But Horus Heresy is basically Warhammer 30,000, so it's 10,000 years before the what's going on in Warhammer 40,000. It's kind of what brings about what's going on in 40,000 and stuff like that. It's a whole thing.
Is
One of
that
the
the only other like kind of main time zone that they have? Like, is there like a 20,000 or 10,000 or?
Yeah, no, I mean they've got like lore and stuff like that
Okay.
from the before times and whatever, but the only Warhammer 40,000's been around since the 90s, and then at some point I don't even remember when it was, maybe the 2000s, maybe I think maybe it's 2000s, or else it was like sometime maybe the 2010s or whatever. They made a game, and initially you could pretty much only buy the stuff from Forge World, like
Mm.
all the parts and all that kind of stuff. But this is a new plastic box. Looks like it's all plastic kits, stuff that's never been made in plastic before. It's always been made in whatever resin, Forge World resin and stuff like that. New vehicles and figures and all kinds of jazz. And so it's a very popular box. It's for Games Workshop. It is surprisingly reasonably priced. So I did a video about that and painted up a single guy, and that video's been doing great. So that's really cool.
Mm.
But it's one of those where it's like you can't talk about the product until usually on Saturdays, but my videos go live on Fridays. So I still put up a Friday video that's normal. And then I'm also having to put up a second video for Saturday. It'd be really awesome if they would just like change their entire schedule over there at, multi-billion-dollar corporation Games Workshop, just to make things easier for me, and then have the release dates on Fridays. But, I suggested that, and I never heard anything back. So, yeah. So anyway, I did that, and that's been good. So yeah, I had 2 weeks in a row where I needed to put up a video on Friday and Saturday, because previous to the Horus Heresy one, there was the new Kill Team box,
Hmm.
which is the first of the new Kill Team boxes that I like. I mean, Octarius was okay, but this one is, I think, the other two that they've released since then, I've been like, meh, but this one
Yeah.
I kind of like. especially I like the models. The Trader Guard guys are really cool. So anyway, yeah, did that. And then since I finished those Gloomspite Gets on Twitch, now I have started painting some new guys. I have these two kind of random models that I'm working on until I, start my next project. I have that kind of skeletal assassin guy from Broken Anvil Miniatures. It was remember when we were in Reno and we were at the steak place
Mm-hmm.
and we were in we were like waiting to get in and we were talking to John from Monster Fight Club and
Yep.
he had the I think CEO, either CEO or founder or president or something like that from CeoCast, the company that makes the new kind of technology for doing plastic miniatures but not having to use metal molds. And he gave me that model, that little skeleton guy with the cloak and all that stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
I finally put him together and all that kind of stuff and primed him up and whatnot. So I'm painting him on stream, and then I also have this Fishman, this 3D printed Fishman model from I believe Artisans Guild is the Patreon sculptor name company thing that makes it. And a friend of mine, Christopher, sent me that model because he knows I like Fishman, and so he sent me that model. And
Nice.
I've had it since before the pandemic, I'm pretty sure. And I finally just was like, I don't know. Someone was asking me something about 3D printed stuff in one of my Twitch streams, and I just like grabbed that model because I knew where it was on the shelf. And then I was like, what, I should paint that. So I'm painting him and the skeleton guy kind of at the same time. And then after that, probably moving into some more Warcry stuff, vampires and skeletons. So that'll be fun. And
Nice.
then I don't know, maybe Space Hulk, maybe Korn Bloodbound. I don't know. It's trying to figure out what to do next after that stuff. But it's it's you got to keep
Choices.
moving with Twitch.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yep.
got to keep moving. Yeah. And then also ran TMX Tabletop Minions Expo. Did that.
Yeah, I was super sad. Like I was really excited at both my Denver trip, and then I'm like, whoa, oh wait, I'm gonna miss TMX, and so I was
Right.
sad.
Yeah.
But so how did TMX go?
It was. I mean, it's in sports they refer to it as a rebuilding year. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And just because of the pandemic and 2 years off, last one we did was in 2019, and the Tabletop Minions Expo was very small to begin with. It's
Mhm.
not. I'm not talking about any like TMX 2019. I think was 80 or 85 people, so it's pretty small. This year it was like 40,
Mhm.
so it was considerably smaller as well. But the other thing was about this year was I wasn't even really able to start like advertising it until I think it was post Adepticon. So like beginning of April
Yeah.
is when I could start telling people about it because we just didn't know like is there another variant of the thing, like what's going on. Like the college was like kind of like up in the air and all that kind of stuff. And then finally like around April they were like, well, we're going to have, we're saying yes to events again,
Mhm.
so that date that we had talked about, you are go for that. Of course, barring who knows what could still happen. Something could have cropped up a week
Right.
before, but so we went with that. And
And that seems to
but
be
yeah,
kind of the theme of this year, right? Is just
in
read up,
general, yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah. We're gonna try to start getting things back to normal, but we have no idea if it actually will. And
hmm
we're gonna play it by ear.
Yeah, I mean, Gen Con, like in 2021, they had Gen Con again, and they
Right.
required masks, but they didn't have any requirement for vaccines or proof of
Right.
vax or anything like that. But they also limited the size of Gen Con. Gen Con in 2019 was 72,000 people or something like that, and they like capped it at 35,000 in 2021. Well, this year I don't think they're having a cap, but now they're also requiring proof of vax, and they're still doing masks. So that's
Oh,
that just came out a week ago, 2 weeks ago, something like that. And I mean,
yeah.
there was some rending of garments and gnashing of teeth online, but that's standard. And so yeah, I mean, everyone's still kind of just like dancing as fast as they can, trying to figure out what needs to get done. But TMX was fun. It was yeah, we had to, let's see, there was some Necromunda that was run, there was some
Nice.
Car Wars, there was some Warcry, there were let's see here, there was a it looked like a homebrew game called Mech Attack with like 3D printed like battle mechs that were like,
Oh, that's cool.
I don't know, probably 10 inches tall. They were real
Oh,
big.
wow.
Oh
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was a big space that they were playing in. It had big buildings and all kinds of stuff like that. It had a lot of players for that. There was a couple of different like there was an indie game called Country Road Z, which is like some sort of a zombie thing
Huh.
that I had not heard of. There was a person named Nathan or Nathaniel, Nathaniel, I think, who had come and run a skirmish game, a fantasy skirmish game he's working on, which I think is called Bound in Blood, and that
Oh,
had
nice.
good attendance. There was a guy named Adam who was running one page rules, Grimdark Firefight, I believe. So that's basically
Okay.
kind of like the kill team analog, as opposed to like regular Grimdark. I think it's called Grimdark Future is like 40K scale as far as like number of models and stuff like that. It's an
Okay.
army game. Whereas Grimdark Future Firefight is like more like a kill team scale where you're looking at, 10 to 15 models max or whatever on your per side. So but he was running the skirmish version, and people were enjoying that too. I would have honestly liked to have sat down and played that because I've got Grimdark Future Firefight and I've messed around with it a little bit, like trying to figure out how the game loop works, but I have not sat down and actually played a game. So doing a demo would have been actually kind of nice. But I was running the convention and stuff. So, but some people came from the East Coast, some people came from Texas. We didn't have anybody from Australia this year. We didn't have anybody from overseas, I don't think, but we did have some people come from outside of town. People from Iowa, people from Illinois. Vince came up from Ohio, and we hung out as well, so that was good. But yeah, so it was a good time.
Nice.
It was a good time. Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah. So let's see here. Crowdfunding. Have you heard of this? Have you heard of the crowdfunding?
Crowdfunding. No, is this where like you've like put out your hat on a subway or?
Well, no. But so crowdfunding, for those of you that don't know, but probably most of you, if you're
Living under a
gamers, you
rock.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They crowdfunding is like your Kickstarters and things like that. GameFound is becoming a big one too. GameFound is designed to be specifically just for games,
Mm-hmm.
whereas Kickstarter is technically for all kinds of things, but games seem to be the largest. I came across several articles while working on this that said that gaming is the largest um, section, vertical, whatever you want to call it, in Kickstarter. Now that may also include video games, which would explain a lot, but still, there have been some really, really big crowdfunds through Kickstarter specifically. We were just before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about Exploding Kittens and how that one raised almost $9 million for a game about exploding kittens, a card game. So it's crowdfunding is definitely it's a thing that's been going on for quite a while. I remember the first crowdfund that I did, first Kickstarter, was probably I think it was probably the not Car Wars, the Ogre 6th edition from Steve Jackson Games. That's like 2012 or something, 2011.
Nice.
So yeah, it's been going on for a while, obviously. But
yeah, I think mine was like a coffee mug. It was like one of those. It was just like it was supposed to like it cooled the coffee faster, but then kept it warm. Like it transferred the heat into it and then transferred, but kind of kept it as like a.
So it like made it so it wasn't so hot, but also didn't let it get cold.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And like remarkably, it works actually pretty well.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is that stuff will actually like I one of the first things I think around the same time that the Ogre 6th edition one from Steve Jackson Games that I was doing that, there was also Pebble. Remember Pebble?
Pebble.
The smartwatch?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, this was like before the Apple Watch, before the Fitbit and all that kind of stuff. This company made, and it was a small group of people. Like what excuse me, like what Kickstarter and crowdfunding in general were meant for. It was a small group of people who were like, we have this idea, we have the technology, we have the know-how and the technology, we just don't have the money to get it set and go. And it was basically a smartwatch that used an e-ink screen. So it didn't, it just sipped like power. And of course, obviously you couldn't see it in the dark and stuff like that, but still. And it was designed to eventually it was supposed to work with like your phone so that you could get like, oh wow, I get it would vibrate and I would see that I've got an email and stuff like that, which at that time was completely weird. Excuse me. So that was kind of the early days of Kickstarter, and and it was interesting because it was doing what it was supposed to do, and that's cool.
Right.
And then like I said with Ogre 6th edition and other things that started cropping up, you started seeing tabletop gaming kind of really lean into the crowdfunding thing, and it's been leaning into it more and more, kind of ever since, right?
Yeah, I would say, it went from like people that always wanted to design a game that didn't do it, or like companies that really just didn't have the budget to do something, kind of trying it out. Like one game, it was like escape room in a box. It was before you could buy these everywhere.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and it was two designers that did. I think it was two designers. And they actually now, like when we do the work for Renegade Games,
Hmm.
the Crimes and Capers, they're the ones that behind the Crimes and Capers series. So
Yeah, yeah.
they were able to basically launch their career doing it. But yeah, now it's like it's almost seems weird to see a game go directly to the store. It seems like.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we'll kind of mention this a little bit later, but like when Vince and I produced our miniature game, we had a lot of people that were like, "Why didn't you use Kickstarter?" Because I made a joke in the video that I did where I kind of announced, "Hey, this is this game," and I was like, "Oh yeah, and, we're really excited to show you all the stuff and blah blah, and we'll be going live on Kickstarter in a couple of months." And then I was like, "No, I'm kidding. It's available right now. You can buy it right now." And then like pointed down at the bottom of the screen where there was like a link, and you could,
Mhm.
Um, but we did have people who were like, "Well, but why didn't you do a Kickstarter?" We were like, "Because we didn't need to." You know what I mean? Like, it's a digital game with print on demand. If we had to get like 10,000 copies printed and then fill up our garages with stuff so that we could send stuff off, well, then yeah, you want money up front for that if you can. If you can't afford it,
Right.
and that's the whole point of crowdfunding. I've got friends that have been able to produce, indie games because they were able to you know, actually get their goals hit in Kickstarter. I mean, our friend Matt, who did Wreckage, like Wreckage was a Kickstarter.
Oh, nice. I don't think I ever knew
Yeah,
that.
yeah, our friend Glenn, who he had an RPG called Mistrunner that was
Hmm.
also a Kickstarter. I mean, like if it's a situation, if you're like, well, it's going to cost $5,000 to make this game, and I don't have $5,000, well, then then that's the big benefit. I think that's what it's for. It's never been a store, but sometimes I think people kind of will treat it like that, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
like
I'm
you're
even
expecting
guilty
to
of
buy
it.
stuff online. You
Yeah.
expect to buy stuff online and then you get it in a couple of days or whatever, and then you do this and you're like, "Okay, cool, but I'm gonna buy this." And you're like, "Oh, that's right. I'm not gonna get it till next year." You know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
and there's definitely some of that, like where you're like, "Oh, this seems too good to be real," and then you find out it was too good to be real.
sure, exactly. It's a store that may or may not deliver actually, and it will also definitely take some time to get you the product.
Hmm.
But the upside is that generally you do have a tendency to get more for your money, than regular retail. And that's the thing. That's where they get you. That's where they get you right there. Because
Yeah.
there's been plenty of Kickstarters where I'm like, I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait till it comes out in retail because it's a big enough company or something like that.
Hmm.
Small companies, sometimes that stuff never comes out in retail. But if it's
Right.
a slightly bigger company that's like, we're gonna do this, you're like, okay, cool. That's great. Hey,
Yeah.
great. You're doing a Kickstarter, great. But I know that I'm able to get this in my local store when it comes out, and then I won't have to worry about it. But the trick is that you'll also know, especially if you've had any experience in this, very frequently you're going to get a better deal, or you're going to get a lot more stuff. Like yeah, at retail the box is going to be this, it's going to cost $100, but right now if you pay $89, you're going to get this plus all these dozens and dozens of stretch goals
Hmm.
potentially if we hit that and all that other stuff. And so there's part of our lizard brains. It's like, yeah, but I could get more stuff. I just have to wait longer. I mean,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that's what makes it definitely not
Hmm.
a store.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's some like, well, and if you when it does go to retail, it's going to be 20% more or something like that. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's. I mean, that I saw with and it's happened a bunch lately, but of course it's kind of a special case. But it happened with Car Wars. So again, Steve Jackson Games back, like I said, in their early 2010s when they did Ogre and they did that Kickstarter. One of the stretch goals, like $750,000, that stretch goal was if we hit this
Hmm.
thing, then we promise that we'll make a Steve or a Car Wars Kickstarter and a new version of Car Wars.
Right.
And it took them nearly a decade, but they did it. Uh, and but the problem is that the Kickstarter for Car Wars was before the pandemic, and the stuff came out and actually was produced after. Well, not, not after, but after the beginning of the pandemic. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So there's a box that the box that I paid for the Kickstarter. I think I paid $150 for
Okay.
the double ace box is what it's called.
Yep.
And the retail on that's like $375 now. So, I mean, and now part of that's because of the pandemic and the global shipping stuff, which again we'll talk about in a bit. But it's not a store, and so we want to make obviously people know that. And if you've done any Kickstarter stuff, you do know that. But there is good and bad to Kickstarter, and we kind of want to hit on the points and then kind of talk about whether it's still a thing. I mean, it's obviously still a thing. It's still going great, but
right.
Whether it's
a good thing,
is it yeah, or not. As far as the good stuff, I don't know. I think that, I mean, like we've mentioned a couple of times already, the crowdfunding. The whole point of it initially is to be able to get people to be able to get money for the ideas that they have, so that they can actually, make those ideas become reality.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
That's the whole point. You've got the idea for this smartwatch. Okay, cool. Now you've raised, I don't know, a couple $1 million, and you can actually get it produced. Or you've got an idea for a great role playing game, or a comic book, or an album, a music album, or something like that. And you just don't have the money to be able to do it right now. If you can get enough people on board who are interested in that same thing, now you can have the money,
Right. Yeah, it kind of scratches the itch of like, well, all of us want this made. Why won't the industries just make it? It's like, oh no, now we can, we have a voice to do that. So.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And a couple of things. I think that it causes things to be able to be produced that, and you were talking about, like, we got this idea, why doesn't the industry do it? Very frequently, industry doesn't just throw money down a hole because they're concerned that you're not going to see a return from that. That's the whole concept. Steve Jackson had to be convinced to do the Kickstarter for Ogre 6th edition or whatever. I think it's 6th edition, because he was like, nobody wants to buy that.
More Ogre, yeah.
Yeah, like that. Well, no, he's like that. And that was their first game they produced, like at that point, 35 years previous. That was their very first game. And he's like, nobody wants a new version of Ogre. I don't think that's the case. And people are like, yeah, no, they do. They really do. And he's like, yeah, but so they're like, okay, there's this new thing called Kickstarter. Why don't we use this? And then, if it doesn't make the goal of how much money we need to make it happen, then no harm, no foul. I mean, that's the big benefit also to Kickstarter is if you say, I need $60,000 to make this happen, if you don't get that $60,000, well, then that the market has spoken. The invisible hand of the market has poked you in the nose and said, nope, thanks. So, it's that's the thing. And so when Ogre 6th edition raised nearly $1 million, Steve Jackson was like, oh, I see. And, they've certainly used plenty of Kickstarter since then. Like, every time they make not every time, a lot of times when they make a new, Munchkin or this or that, they do Kickstarters all the time. And the thing about that is that it can be, again, like we said, very helpful for people who are starting out. It's when you get to the point where you can't think about making a game without it that it becomes problematic, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But, it has, I would say, probably it's partially attributed to the explosion in tabletop gaming products, specifically board games over the last decade.
Right. Yeah. I think there's like restoration games, Fireball Island, all that stuff. I don't know if they would have been able to exist, without it.
Exactly, because you're taking a potentially big risk.
Absolutely, and it's a way for them to kind of build hype around it too, like. They don't have to go launch, a bunch of TV ads and stuff for a product because they already had, they got funded and few million people backed it, so now they've word of mouth.
Yeah, well, word of mouth, and also we've noticed this too, Vince and I, and you've probably noticed this as well. Like gaming news sites love to talk about Kickstarters.
Oh, especially when they go crazy. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but even if they don't, they're like, oh, these companies doing a Kickstarter, because it's like if you just go, I released a product, that's not necessarily interesting news for some reason, even though it may be a very cool product. But when you're like, well, we're trying to hit our goal for the Kickstarter. That's like human interest, because you're
Right.
like, oh, trying to raise $30,000, and and if it's like, well, we're hopefully we'll see. I don't know. It's been 6 days and we haven't hit it yet. And then there's other people who are like, oh, we're trying to raise $30,000 and we hit it in 22 minutes, and then
Yeah.
that's news. That's news.
Right.
Like there's like a human interest to the struggle. Whereas if you're just like, hey, we produced a new game and went through a lot of work to make it actually happen, but now it's available in stores. News outlets these days are kind of like, yeah, I'm not that interested in that. That's not very interesting, and
Hmm.
that's what's kind of frustrating. Now, again, like I said, for Vince and I, we have our own kind of news outlets, so we can tell people about it. But if we
Right.
didn't,
Hmm.
it would definitely be a thing you would want to do some sort of Kickstarter because that'll help. Now, that being said, we've also noticed this as well. Just having a Kickstarter does not guarantee that you're going to get people talking to you. The
Right.
big Kickstarters this day and age have a ton of marketing money behind them.
There's a lot of noise and
Mhm.
so if you're gonna kind of give yourself a real fighting chance and not just a lottery ticket, you've got to build hype, um, start having people sign up for it when you launch and all that stuff, so that once the ticking clock starts, you can go, because that really drives your momentum and whether or not you can be
Exactly.
successful. And and sometimes you'll see like some Kickstarters that do oh, we need to raise $100 to be successful or something like that. And you're like,
Right.
there's no way that that's your actual goal. Like
No,
that's
yeah, a lot of the companies have been kind of like sandbagging a bit lately, where they're like, like I'll see. I don't know if I can't remember specifically if it was Cool Mini or not, but it was some company that's a big company and has done plenty of successful Kickstarters.
Mhm.
And they were like, their goal was like laughably low. They're like, if we can hit $5,000, we'll be able to produce this like Marvel game. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I think you'll be able to do it. And then
No,
they're like, oh, we hit our goal in 20 seconds. And you're like, yeah,
right.
no kidding. You
And
know,
you kind of know that if they only, like, say for that one, raised like $5,200, it would never see the light of day.
Right, yeah, if we could hit $5,000, we'll make this game. Like, well, you hit 5,200, and they're like, well, we
Res-
can't actually do that.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times too, now we're starting to see this as well as far as the timeline is concerned, because there were a lot of big kind of high profile games specifically that didn't hit their goals and all that kind of stuff, which in this day now, a day and age of global shipping crisis is even worse.
Hmm.
Now you're seeing a lot of these companies that are like, oh yeah, that's like, I remember it was a Kingdom Death Monster, like way back in 2016. They're like, yeah, we're going to have all of our stuff produced and everything ready to go by 2020. And everyone's like, geez, that's going to take forever. And they're like, well, we're going to get it done sooner than that, but we don't want to. We want to
Right.
under promise and
Yeah.
over produce, or whatever,
Right.
like,
The
yeah,
expectations. Yeah.
exactly. So you're seeing companies now doing that where they're like, oh, you're not going to see this till next year sometime. And you're like, oh, well, I guess. But then you see it actually in 6 months
Hmm.
because but they weren't sure. Maybe it was going to take 8 months. And so they didn't want to get too tight with so that's kind of good, I think, is them being like, look, get ready for maybe slightly disappointment,
Hmm.
but we're going to tell you that from the beginning. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, so there's that too. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing is that if you do if you have like as a person who's a backer, a pledger, or is it a backer? You're a backer, I
Backer.
think.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
backer.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you are. It is your pledge, but you are a backer. That's kind of anyway. Having faith that this stuff it can get you a good deal. Kind of like I talked about with Car Wars.
Hmm.
I paid considerably less than retail, and that's great. And also, we got the stuff. Like the people who backed it got the stuff a little bit before people at retail, so that's
Right.
good too.
But yeah,
I mean,
and
I'm
it's
not
kind
as
of
concerned about that, but a lot of people on Kickstarter get real angry when you can buy the
mhm,
thing in retail, but they haven't gotten their super fancy giant version of it yet, from Kickstarter.
right, especially when it's like a stretch goal that they added, like especially on like kind of like your viral ones where it really was
Hmm.
a small
Hmm.
company that just did not expect it to take off, and then so they're just like scrambling, like, well, we only had stretch goals figured out until $100,000, and we're at $1.2 million.
Right.
So
Yeah.
now
So
we're
now
trying
we're
to figure
just
throwing
making
stuff
stuff
into,
up.
and you're like, oh, that's cool. Maybe hopefully you guys can still produce it for that cost, but at the same time, you're like, okay, there's stuff that's going to be in this game that if we hadn't all backed it, would never have happened.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. That's the thing. Companies are taking more chances, not just in the stretch goals and the things like they may add into these ideas, but just the ideas themselves.
Hmm.
One of the Kickstarters that I did back this year was for a game that is like weird World War One. So it's like alternate history World War One, like miniature skirmish, and you have haunted tanks, and you have sentient clouds of mustard gas, and you have all kinds of crazy stuff, which is a very small niche, tiny little thing. But this was a one man show. This is
Hmm.
a guy named Kevin, and he made this game and is producing it. And his goal was to raise $3,000, and he raised like 32 grand, which is awesome.
Right, right.
But it is a situation of like, yeah, he would have not been able to do it. It's not like a thing where he was like sandbagging and go, well, if I can only raise $3,000, but he's like literally like one man person. So he's like, hey, if I can't raise $3,000, I can't really produce this thing.
Right.
And so, but that's a thing that you would not just find a normal company saying, you know what, we're going to make a game about sentient mustard gas clouds and weird World War One and put it out there. So that's what's really interesting about the Kickstarter kind of crowdfunding concept, is that you can put things out there that maybe don't come across initially to the people in marketing as, yeah, this is a good idea, we should definitely do this, but there is still a group of people out there who are interested. And so and you can get a good gauge at how interested too. That's the other
Hmm.
big benefit.
Right.
So yeah, I still think that there's good in crowdfunding, some, and I think you have to kind of pick and choose. I was really initially trying to not do any, crowdfunding this year. I have already failed because, but admittedly, what I'm trying to do, and we'll talk about this towards the end, that kind of as well, is that I'm focusing a little bit more on the stuff that's predominantly digital.
Mm, yeah.
So there has been some of that,
Less risk
but
of it. Yeah, with the shipping issues, right? You don't have to
exactly,
ship anything.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what kind of bad things can you think of as far as is there anything bad in crowdfunding? I don't know.
I've heard nothing bad ever
No,
came
it's
out
all
of.
gone well.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, thanks for listening to the
Yeah.
podcast. Yeah. Uh, I mean, there's obviously, we've all heard horror stories to some degree if you've been paying attention
Yeah.
to Kickstarter and stuff like that.
Have you been a part of a horror story yet?
There was a little tiny indie video game that I just thought about recently because I was
Okay.
searching for something in my Gmail. Like I was doing a keyword search for something in my Gmail, and I came
Okay.
across one of their missives, and I'm like, I don't think that ever actually got finished. I don't remember ever getting like I think it would have been a Steam key or something like that, because it was
Mm.
a video game, and so and they changed the name like halfway through the project as well. The
Oh.
original name for it was called Tiny Trek, and it was
Okay.
kind of like a space exploration game. And I'm like, and it was, I'm like, and yeah, they decided to change the name because otherwise they were going to get sued by Paramount or whatever, because it's like Star Trek. But and so anyway, but yeah, I think that's one of the few. Most of them I've gotten. Some of them have taken longer than usual. I mean,
Mm.
Ogre 6th edition was probably 2 years late.
Okay.
But it was also, and I've mentioned this before too, it was a 27-pound box. It was
Right.
massive. Like
Right.
it was just crazy, stupid massive. And so, and honestly, the Car Wars stuff that I got for my the stretch goals and all that junk for that
Mm.
recent Kickstarter, when that stuff showed up in 2021, it just was like, oh, good Lord, and that's one of the problems, honestly, that we've talked about in the past, that sometimes as a backer, you can just end up with far more stuff than you anticipated. I know board game Kickstarter people, like people who
Yeah.
buy a lot of board games, just end up with like a lot of stuff. And same with miniatures,
Hmm.
folks.
Yeah. There's
God
times
forbid that you get
that.
behind like
Yeah.
the Reaper Bones things,
Oh, geez. Yeah.
and then you actually get it, and you're like, wow, I have 300 miniatures. What the heck
Well,
am I going to do
yeah.
with all these?
Hmm. Yeah, and that's my horror story is one of the miniature things.
Hmm.
It's delivered. They delivered it to every place but North America. And then basically
Okay,
went
weird.
silent for 6 months. Because they had issues getting it. That particular shipping, those shipping containers had issues, and then they got delayed coming in. I don't know. It was this whole thing. I couldn't really understand some of the updates that were coming through, and then they went silent. But then suddenly, like a week or two ago, they were like, "Oh yeah, we're still planning on doing this. You should be getting it." And I'm like, I don't know. This is like 2 years after you promised, like, "Oh, it's going to be here next month." But that was
Yeah,
the thing
yeah.
is like, I think if it does ever show up, there's going to be like 300 something minis. And then I was silly and backed like two of their other projects. So if they finally fulfill everything, I don't know. I'm going to have a room full of just minis, which I have no idea what I'm going to do with.
It'll be like one of those ball pits, like
Oh, yeah.
yeah, except that it's just minis. You just fill up the room
I'll
and it's
find
just like
random
waste.
neighborhood kids hidden.
Yeah, just throw them in there. Ow. It's pointy. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's the issue is that it can be like that.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
like,
I don't
oh,
know.
unless I'm going to become a professional, player of this board game, I'm never going to use all these pieces and
Exactly. Yeah.
expansions. Yeah,
Yeah, no, that's the thing is that sometimes, because again, the stretch goal thing is great, and where you're like, look at all this extra value I'm getting, and that's awesome. Like, and that has gone poorly for people, for backers sometimes, because then you
hmm
get this box and you're like, oh, good Lord, where am I going to put all this stuff? It's gone poorly for me. I'm not going to lie. But it's also gone poorly actually for publishers too. Like, that's the thing.
yeah,
Kickstarter is not necessarily all, it's not always awesome for the publishers as well. There have been publishers
yeah,
out there that have gotten overzealous with stretch goals and
hmm
things like that, like during the actual pledge campaign. And then when it comes time to produce that stuff and ship that stuff and all that stuff, whatnot, it can you can end up losing money.
right. They're like,
Like there's plenty of
yep,
stories of that.
absolutely. Yeah, you can drive. Even successful companies could go under if they don't,
Hmm.
manage that properly. And then now you add in the shipping costs and stuff like that. Like, I remember,
Especially now, yeah.
yeah, like originally, like a lot of Kickstarters when I was first backing Kickstarters, it included shipping, for the country of origin or stuff like. It was like, oh,
Oh
U.S.
yeah,
backers, no shipping. I'm like,
right.
oh, that's interesting. Like, I can't imagine that right now. Like, if somebody had done
No.
that.
Well, think about it. That 27-pound box of Ogre 6th edition, I distinctly remember that shipping was included.
Jeez.
If you were in the United States,
Yeah.
because that's where it was going to be, eventually fulfilling from. And again, that was the thing too. Back then, you'd get it produced, let's say in China or whatever, and then they would ship it to the United States, and then you would ship it to the rest of the world. Well, now these folks are being smarter, and they're like, China's going to send some to a UK facility, some to a US facility, some to a whatever, so that it's trying to like make it so we're not shipping something from one side of the ocean and then back again to the other
Right.
side and that kind of thing. But yeah, no, it's something that companies have to be very careful with. They have to, there's a lot of, I'm sure that there's tons and tons and tons of ebooks you can buy out there. And there's plenty of consultants out there as well. I know there's consultants that will work with you to be like, look, this is how we run a successful campaign, not just get a
hmm
lot of, pledges, but also make sure that you're not going to run yourself out of business trying to fill all that kind of stuff
Right.
and everything.
Absolutely.
It can be real sketchy if you're small, or if you are small and you get something that is like all of a sudden goes viral, and then you are in a situation where you start throwing in more and more stretch goals. Yeah, the stretch goals can really come back to bite you, especially with the way shipping is now. I mean, that's the thing. There are companies out there that had a successful Kickstarter in late 2019 and now are trying to figure out, still to this day, how to get that stuff to people without completely going out of business, because shipping containers cost 3, 4, 5 times as much to rent as they used to be, and that kind of stuff,
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So the other thing that is, I think, bad about crowdfunding in general is we're seeing big companies that really don't need to use it, and they're running it basically as a pre-order.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I get it. I understand why they're doing it. I just don't like it.
Yeah, yeah, same here.
It's yeah. It makes it so that the small companies we're talking about have even more noise that they're trying to like rise above.
Yep. Hmm.
And two, it seems weird that like a multi-million-dollar company needs to hold on to my money for 2 months
Or
earlier
longer, much
than
longer.
right. And I can't imagine like game stores and stuff being like, "Oh, that's awesome. Thanks for not including me in this and sending it directly to my customer and stuff like that."
Hmm.
So,
Hmm. There's a lot of game stores that are unhappy about crowdfunding in general. There are some that kind of play along,
hmm
because you're starting to see some of these companies that are creating a
retail
pledge level that's
levels. Yep.
designed for retailers. So you own a store, well, you can get this too, and then sell it to your customers direct and blah 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 and whatnot. Um,
Yeah, and that was
but
one of the things that,
yeah.
like, one of my friends, his, kids had designed a game during the pandemic that they were playing,
Mhm.
and they talked him into, doing a Kickstarter, um, and then so he was asking me for advice. I'm like, "Make a retail level, where they could buy 5 or 10 at a time, for,
Mhm.
less and stuff," and he did that, and it sold a couple, and then, because of that, it also made it a lot faster to hit that retail the funding level
The
because
goal.
the
Yeah.
bulks, yeah, the bulk sales.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think if you do it right, and especially if you do, and it depends on, of course, on the thing. If you're doing a Kickstarter for a line of STL files for 3D printing and stuff like that, stores aren't interested in that particularly.
right,
But if it's a physical product and it's a box game and stuff like that, the issue that also a lot of stores see is that, well, okay, after the Kickstarter's done, and then you're like, okay, now we're taking it to distribution. The people who were all interested in that game, many of them already have it.
right.
So why would I, as a game store, buy this through distribution to have it sit on my shelf and have people walk in and go, "Oh, that's an awesome game. I backed it on Kickstarter." And then you're like, "Yeah, but who's going to buy it?" And that's
Mhm.
kind of an issue too. And you have big companies that are doing that kind of stuff. Cool Mini or Not is a big one. I think that they could probably afford to make a game without running a Kickstarter, but they don't seem to think so. Um, but you also get you even get companies now that are just like, you know what, we're gonna make our own Kickstarter. You know what I mean? Like you're starting
Right.
to see, Hasbro did that kind of.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
admittedly
mm,
they'd done it kind of earlier and stuff, but yeah, like for
mhm.
HeroClix, or not HeroClix, HeroQuest, they
That's
did
right,
their
that's
own
what it
kind of
was.
thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Um, Now there are other small companies that are kind of taking that sort of situation and doing it too. There's a small company in the miniature gaming space called Blacksite Studios that makes, and I forget what they call it, but it is basically like, hey, we have this idea for a game, and
Mhm.
if enough people basically like kind of pre-order it, then we'll make it. And if they don't,
Mm.
well, then it wasn't an idea that was very good, and then we kind of won't, you know. And
Ah,
but it has
okay,
allowed
so
them to produce, yeah, like that lunar game,
the
the one that they did with
yep.
like, it's basically a skirmish battle on the moon. It's guys in like space suits walking around
Oh,
shooting each other.
yeah, yeah.
That was one of those things. I'm
Ah,
pretty sure, and they're doing another one I think right now, which it's a word that starts with Y, and it's like a fantasy game, and I can't think of what it's called. But so
got it.
that
So
makes
it's like
sense. I
right, so, like, kinda like the Lego Ideas thing that, like, they'll make the set as long as, like, 10,000 people have voted or something like that, or
Yeah, yeah, kind of, but more with like a little bit more like with
but
saying yes, I will buy that,
right,
but it's not having to go through Kickstarter, and then you're not having to pay fees to Kickstarter.
right.
That's the thing, is that Kickstarter takes like 10% or something like that. I think I've never run one, so I don't know exactly, but I know it's a percentage that they take, which makes sense. They're doing the
Yeah.
thing and all that kind of stuff, but still, but yeah, so for small companies doing it, again, we're all for small companies and small, designers and stuff like that. I'm fine with the concept of using crowdfunding for that. And if you even do your own crowdfunding, kind of like Blacksite Studios is, that's
Mhm.
also cool. It's a smart idea. Um, Obviously, with Blacksite Studios, when they do their own thing, then they have to. You're not part of the Kickstarter ecosystem, so it's more of a. You kind of have to push it out there to let people know about it more. The
Right.
marketing thing is a little bit harder, but they're enough of an established company, and they have kind of customers that their
Right,
base.
but yeah, there's less likely that someone's gonna be looking at something else and go, "Oh, wait, what's this?" The
Mhm.
recommendation, stumble upon it.
Exactly. Yeah. I got to be honest, I've never like just browsed through Kickstarter. Everything I've ever backed on Kickstarter was something I found out someplace else and came in there. And even when they're like, "Well, if you like this, maybe you like this," I've never liked that. Yeah, you know what I
Oh,
mean? Like that's just a thing. I don't know.
I
I mean,
I'm
I'm
guilty.
sure it works on people. Sure, yeah, that's fine.
Yep,
But
yep.
it's I sometimes wonder if it's as effective as, I mean, it's effective to some degree, certainly, but I don't know if it's as
I
effective
found
as
for, like,
maybe they
3D
try to
printed
push.
ones, I do them 3D printed ones, I think I've found the most because 'cause I'm like, I'll be looking at something like, "Oh, this is okay, and then I'll
Hmm.
see
Hmm.
something and it's like, "Well, what about this one?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that is exactly what I'm looking for." So
Yeah, and I'm a fan these days of the digital stuff specifically on Kickstarter as a
mhm,
backer, because I know I'm probably going to get it. I mean,
right.
in 9 times out of 10, when a company is like, "Hey," or a group of people or a single person is like, "I'm doing a Kickstarter for STLs," the STLs are done. which is a little weird. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, why not
it
just sell
depends,
them?
but
You know what
yeah,
I mean? I mean, yeah, every
yeah,
once in a while they're not. There's like maybe some stretch goal ones are like, well, if we make enough money, then I'll also do these 6 things or whatever, and that's cool. But in a
mm,
lot of situations, I'm like, you're already showing us the 3D renders of them, which means that they're already sculpted. So, but again, it's that situation where if somebody just releases something into the stores, somebody releases something into My Mini Factory or whatever, that
right,
doesn't make news as easily as when like, oh, this guy's doing a Kickstarter. And you're like, yeah, but all of the stuff's already done. You know what I mean? Like, so
right.
yeah, it's kind of interesting that way. Um, so yeah, is it still a good idea for tabletop gaming? Crowdfunding. It's still a way to raise money for your small gaming project.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Like we
I
said.
can't imagine the table like if crowdfunding just suddenly disappeared. I can't see anything. I can't see it being a good thing for the industry at all.
On the small end for sure, definitely for
Yeah,
the indie people, for the people who are trying to start out, who've got a great new
yeah.
cool idea. Yeah, it
I
would be
think
real problematic.
we wouldn't lose tabletop gaming, but I think it would
No,
really like the I think the benefits far outweigh any kind of negatives. That
exactly. But we still have to realize it's not free money. You know what I mean? It's not
right?
like I was talking to somebody just recently who was like, "Oh yeah, I think I'll probably do a Kickstarter," and I'm like, "But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna." You know what I mean? Kickstarters
Yeah.
don't always work. I think the vast majority of them maybe don't. I don't know. I mean, that's like, especially if you don't have an audience to talk to
Hmm.
about it or something like that, it's very hit or miss whether you're going to get, unless you have a boatload of money to throw into advertising like on Facebook and YouTube and
Hmm.
places like that to send people to the Kickstarter. You have a hard time, trying to get people. There's a lot of eyeballs out there, but there's also a lot of products, a lot of products.
Yeah,
So yeah,
it'd
that's the
be
thing.
interesting to see like what the failure rate is of that
Yeah, no,
stuff.
that's a good point. There's probably some information out there about that. I would
I'm
think.
sure.
Well, maybe not. Maybe that kind of stuff is held a little bit close to the vest or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, and is it, gamers have become very used to crowdfunding. I mean, specifically tabletop gamers, you see that a lot. I talk to people even in like non-gaming situations, and I'll be like, "Oh, you heard of Kickstarter?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah," and you're getting more and more of that. But there's also people who are like, not gamers, and you're like, "Have you heard of Kickstarter?" And they're like, "No." But it is becoming a thing, like I said, where gamers are very used to it and are basically in many situations almost becoming to expect it. Like I said
Hmm.
earlier, people kept asking me and Vince, "Well, why did you guys do a Kickstarter?" I'm like, because it didn't seem like it was a necessary thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and
Seems
I
like
I
more work.
honestly
Yeah.
don't think. Well, yeah, that's the thing. It would have been more work, and we would have lost 10% of whatever, and we just, I mean, we're the company that we're working with currently to actually fulfill stuff and whatever and all that jazz, the War Game Vault. I mean, they take a percentage anyway because they're taking care of all the credit card transactions and the chargebacks and the customer service and all that jazz that we don't have to handle, and that's great. But then doing a Kickstarter for that same thing, the Kickstarter would have been a situation of like, then we would have gotten a bunch of things printed, and then we would have had to warehouse them and fulfill them and all that stuff.
Hmm.
And if the game that you're trying to produce could just be a book or even just be a PDF specifically, then yeah, I don't know that there's a big reason unless you don't have the money for good artwork. And then I could see trying to raise money for that.
But
But
yeah,
otherwise, if it's digital,
yeah, but even then, like I feel like if you don't have good artwork, it's hard to. I feel like Kickstarter, you need to have good artwork and visual appeal. So
right, exactly.
it
It's like
seems like
it's the catch 22.
right. It seems like if you're an artist that like say you're doing a computer game, like you have a good
Hmm.
idea for a computer game. If you're an artist and just need money to hire a programmer to work with you, it's a lot easier than if you're a programmer and need to hire like artists and stuff like that. Because by the time you're like, oh, well, we already had to pay someone to do these just so that people could understand what we were going with.
Exactly. In this day and age, if you were to put up a Kickstarter and you're like, well, one of the things we're going to do is that when we get the money, we are going to then hire an artist who will be able to show you a cool logo and a cool, intro video, and we'll have actual cool artwork. Like that ship has already sailed,
Right.
basically. Like if you just show up with a bunch of text in your Kickstarter, you're going to get nothing. So
Hmm.
it's kind of almost as if you've already got to pay up front for that stuff so that you have it so that you can, you know what I mean? Like that. Yeah. It's a bit of a cart before the horse situation. So yeah, it's interesting. It is definitely interesting. And then, of course, if you are going to be shipping physical products and getting them manufactured and going through all that rigmarole, understanding that the global shipping crisis and all that kind of stuff, and as backers, we need to understand that as well. It's just there's going to be delays. You know what I mean? And
Unless
just
they're
understand that your
unless
pledge will possibly
they're
be late
producing it
unless they
someplace
really
else, right?
sandbag.
Right, or
Yeah.
producing it locally.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, we're starting to see companies that are starting to try to bring their manufacturing closer to because it used to be, obviously everybody was getting everything done in China to some degree, but we're starting to see, we were just talking about this yesterday, you and I,
Yep.
and this has nothing to do with Kickstarter specifically, but War Games Atlantic is starting to, they've basically gotten all their molds out of China and have now moved them to the United States, even though I think they're a UK company, but I'm not sure on that. And they're doing production in the United States now because then it's easier for them to get it shipped from there and then to the UK and other places than it is to get it from China, then to the UK, then shipped to America and all that kind of stuff. So, what's his name there? Games Workshop. You may have heard of them. They're doing kind of the same thing. They've produced their own miniatures in Nottingham for a long time, but the terrain, a lot of the plastic terrain was being made in China, and they're moving that to America. And even the book printing and stuff like that, or not to America, to the UK, or at least Europe, closer than China. You're starting to see companies that are like looking for ways. And like we were talking about SEOcast earlier when I was talking about that skeleton assassin guy, that is allowing companies like Monster Fight Club, Reaper, Warlord, and stuff like that to be able to produce models in their own facility and not have to get plastic models, but still they make them right there in their warehouse or whatever. So yeah, the global shipping crisis is definitely something that's affecting Kickstarter, and people are trying to find ways to mitigate it. But it does all told, I think that Kickstarter is a positive because it has brought around some more innovation and just things that probably would never see the light of day that now can, even if it's like, I'm just trying to raise $5,000, like it's not something that a big company would look at and even think about, but like this person's got a passion project and they just don't have the $5,000 to make it happen. And now maybe if they can hit that goal, then now they do, and then they can produce something, and then maybe that becomes something else, and then maybe it goes from there, and then so on and so forth. So you have to be careful. Let's say that. Does that sound right?
Yeah, be cautious,
both as a publisher and a backer.
Don't. I kind of any money I put in the Kickstarter, for the most part, I'm like, if it doesn't get fulfilled and I lose it, it is what it is, type thing. Like I'm gonna make sure I don't use my mortgage payment to back something.
Yeah, right. That would be a heck of a board game, though, if it was. But yeah, I know what you mean. Like, it just Over you have 7. To take it into consideration now at these days that you're just like, look, this may not ever show up, But
right.
And I think that you can kind of sometimes, I don't know. I've been doing it long enough that I can kind of eyeball a project and go, I think this will happen. I mean, even if I'm not even talking about the goal, I'm talking about the actual production. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, it seems like it, but there's still times when I've been wrong. So
yeah,
and sometimes I've been wrong the right way. Like I'm like, I don't think this will ever happen, and then like a couple months later, it shows up at your door, and you're like, wow, okay, I completely misjudged that person.
I just got an email last week from a Kickstarter thing that I backed at the beginning of the year. It's a terrain thing, and they said they're going to be shipping 6 months early.
Nice.
That's weird, right? So I mean, like, that makes them sound pretty cool, right? So there you go. Who knows what's going to happen? But yeah, so I think that crowdfunding in general is pretty good for the industry, but you have to be kind of careful.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks again for listening to this episode of the GameFor Podcast. If you've got questions or comments and you're watching on YouTube, please leave a comment below. If you're listening via your favorite podcast player or just aren't into the whole YouTube comment section thing, then you can feel free to reach out to us via email at podcast@iamgamefor.com. You can also keep up to date with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And check out our website at www.iamgamefor.com. That is www.iamgamefor.com. Thanks.